Hello to folks who've come. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so to allow people to filter in. Well, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm welcome for coming. I thank you for joining us today. I'm Caroline Hendry. I'm the Executive Director of SPJ and the SPJ Foundation. And we are thrilled that you are joining us and you're interested in learning more about applying for funding from the SPJ Foundation. Our goal with the grants is to support high impact projects that aim to protect press freedom and strengthen trust in journalism. Before we dive in, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the SPJ YouTube channel in the coming days. So if you want to revisit something that you've heard or share it with colleagues, you'll be able to do that. Now let's get started. To give you an overview and to answer your questions, I'm pleased to introduce Jane Kirtley. Jane is the chair of the SPJ Foundation's Grants Committee. Jane is a professor and director of the Silla Center for the Study of Media Ethics and Law at the University of Minnesota. And most importantly, she has been a member of SPJ since 1974. So Jane, over to you.
Thank you, Caroline, and good day to everybody. As many of you know, I've been chairing the Grants Committee of SPJ Foundation for a number of years. I'm ably assisted in that task by a number of other SPJ Foundation and SPJ board members. We represent the charitable and educational arm of the Society of Professional Journalists, and the money that the Grants Committee has to make available in every grant cycle is specifically awarded each board meeting by the board. So the committee does not decide how much money we're going to have. We just try to figure out how best to allocate that. We make our recommendations. Those are submitted for board approval. And that's part of the reason for the timeline that we'll be sharing with you in a minute. It's not just a unilateral decision by the committee. It has to be approved by the board in each cycle. Our current priorities, and I think we may need the next slide for this, are to defend the First Amendment and press freedom, to help journalists advocate for themselves and for the profession, and to promote media literacy. I want to just clarify, in case some of you have a question about this, that these priorities have actually changed this year. Historically, the SPJ Foundation had a whole series of priorities that included doing outreach with other organizations, promoting national and in some instances international projects. And obviously there would be times when chapter and regional grants would advance those purposes and we would fund them. But moving forward, these are our new sets of priorities. I say that in part so that if you go back and look at the kind of grants we've given historically, they may not necessarily align with what we'll be doing going forward. Okay, so those are our three main priorities. If your project fits into any of these categories, we encourage you to apply. So and if you go to these websites, you will see our guidelines, our general funding policy, the way to submit your proposal using the online form. This also will give you a list of SPJ Foundation grants going back to 2004. Again, I caution you that the guidelines we had historically are not necessarily the same as the guidelines going forward, but they'll nevertheless give you an idea of the type of things that we fund. Very important, our deadline is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on August 15th. There will not be extensions for that, so make sure that you know that that's the deadline. I believe the next slide provides us with the timeline overall. So August 15th is the application deadline. By late October, we will notify those who have received grants and those who have not received grants by email. Why is that so long? Because our recommendations have to be approved by the full board, and our board meeting will be during Media Fest in October. So that's the reason for that. It's to give us enough time to carefully review the applications, to draft our report, and to have the board consider them. And by November, we will have the agreements sent to you. They will be signed by you, and the funds will be dispersed. Okay. Here are our recommendations about what makes a strong proposal. Very important to connect to the current SPJ priorities. In other words, they need to be mission aligned. I'm sure that many of you have great ideas on other topics that you would like to submit, but the very first thing that the committee will look at is whether your proposal connects to the priorities as enumerated. If they don't, it's very unlikely that we would make an award. Be very clear and very specific about the goal of your project. Sometimes this can be stated in a very simple, straightforward way. Sometimes it's a little more complex. But again, don't assume that we can kind of read between the lines and figure out what you're proposing and particularly what your goals are. Give us details. Your budget also needs to be detailed and also realistic. We have gotten grant requests in the past that have basically said, we want $20,000 to promote press freedom. That's not going to do it. We need to know how you're going to spend the money, who's going to get the money, and how the expenditures are going to advance your project to fruition. We want to see measurable outcomes. How are you going to determine whether you have succeeded or not? Obviously, not everything will succeed 100% the way that we all might hope, but we need to know, how are you going to measure whether something had an impact or not? Might not happen in the short term, might not happen immediately, or it might happen immediately. If you have a program, an educational program, and you get attendance that far exceeds your expectations, that's probably a measurable outcome that we'd be able to look at. We encourage you to think big in terms of creative and novel approaches, but please make sure that what you're suggesting is something you can actually do. We've had proposals in the past that sounded great in theory, but it simply wasn't possible based on the resources that the requester had for them to accomplish what they had in mind. So make sure that what you're doing is something that is actually feasible for you to accomplish. Here are some common strengths of successful applications, where you're able to show us how it has a positive impact on journalists or journalism writ large. We really like to see the idea that something that you're proposing can be replicated and used by other people. For example, if an individual chapter is proposing a really innovative project, we might be well inclined to fund that, especially if we can make the case that this is essentially a pilot project that could be replicated in other states. That's a really good example of a project that the committee would be excited to see. Meaningful collaboration or partnerships. This is really important to the committee. While there certainly have been cases in the past where we've given grants to an individual chapter, what we really like to see is that you are reaching out to the community, that you're reaching out to other professional groups, or within your SPJ region with other chapters to form partnerships and to make it sort of more bang for the buck, if we can think of it that way. And finally, we're looking for things that are timely and relevant to the many challenges the current media landscape faces. We're not really looking for proposals to engage in scholarly research about an area of, for example, media law or media ethics that may be very interesting to the scholar, but would not be particularly relevant to the current media landscape. So we're looking for things that matter now in the situation where we find ourselves. What not to do. And this is a corollary to what I just talked about. Vagueness, overly broad descriptions. We're not going to be excited about funding that. We want you to be specific and concrete. Don't ignore our guidelines or particularly how your projects ties into SPJ's mission. The board has been very clear to us at the grants committee that we expect to see a clear nexus between SPJ's mission and the projects that we choose to fund. You need to make that case, and we'll be looking for that. Your budget. I alluded to this before. It needs to be quite specific and quite clear. I'm not necessarily saying you need to say you're going to spend $10 on boxes of paper clips, but we need to have an itemized budget that makes it very clear how you're going to expend your money. If you're bringing in a speaker, what's that going to cost? If you're launching an event at a venue, what's that going to cost? Break it down, give us the clear indication of how you're going to spend the money. Don't assume that we understand what you're doing. Even if you have already received grants in the past, we need to know what you're doing now and what you're hoping to achieve. So it doesn't mean you have to write a page and a half on it, but we need to be clear about what you're doing and how it fits into our mission and guidelines.
So thank you so much, Jane, for that overview and that really clear explanation of what the committee's looking for. I'll say at this point, we'd love to open the floor to your questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will look to get to as many as we can.
Okay, I see a question here from New York about funding, making the case for that you've got to spend big to make things happen. Let me tell you in kind of a broad sense how the committee has looked at funding in the past. And these are rules of thumb. I want to be clear. They are not absolute rules that will always apply in all situations. Let me start at the top. We have $75,000 to distribute this cycle. We are very unlikely to give $75,000 to a single project and let it go with that. Part of our stewardship is making sure that we have multiple places where we are making an impact and supporting programs. So if somebody's going to file a request for $75,000, I would say, do not count on a grant of that size. It's not going to happen. Somebody in the past has asked me questions along the line of, well, what kind of grants do you give? And the answer really very much depends on what kind of requests we get, but also what the particular kinds of programs are and how closely they're tied to our mission. If you look at the website for the foundation, which was linked in the slides, you can see the grants we've given historically. And when we had more money to give, our individual grants could be bigger. But now the reality is we have to think how best to spend that money. Now, we like to see multiple partners, and we like to see that the grantees have sought funding from other groups. And so if you come to us, just theoretically, with a grant request for a $3,000 project and you've already raised $1,500, that tells us that number one, you've done the homework to try to get support from other groups and that you have buy-in from other groups. And two, that you probably got a pretty good chance of succeeding. And those are both things that we're looking at. If you've got a huge project that you want to undertake and you're coming to us first for funding, we may or may not be excited about funding that, especially if we think that the odds of you getting that funding are not great. We have people on the grants committee that have been involved in both grantsmanship and seeking grants for many years, and we have a pretty good idea of how likely it is that you're going to be able to get funding. So I realize that this is not terribly concrete. It's really, in many respects, more an art than a science. But again, we're looking for buy-in, we're looking for feasibility, we're looking for impact, and we're also looking for how closely your grant request correlates to our mission and goals. Don't be afraid to make a submission for a big project if you can make the case that it's going to have an impact. Historically, we have said that we like to see an impact beyond just one small area. That's why regional requests are, I won't say exactly favored, but we like to see them because it indicates that there'll be a bigger impact than if it's just one chapter in a relatively isolated location. Again, unless it's something that could easily be replicated elsewhere and we want to kind of do it as a test pilot. So I don't know if I completely responded to the question, but I guess my point would be we have great appreciation for the impact of many of our chapters and regions here. We want to make it possible for them to succeed and have projects with big impacts. But honestly, bear in mind what the total amount of money we have to make available is, and realize that with only $75,000 to give out, we have to be good stewards of that money and not allocate it to a single project.
So Jane, we have some questions folks are typing in. One is, are these grants solely for chapters? And I think we've answered that no, they're not solely for chapters, but certainly chapters are, eligible and encouraged to apply, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, chapters, regions, but we're not necessarily limited to that. However, if, let's say, you're a journalism school and you want to make an application, one of the first questions we would be asking, and which you should address in your application, is, have you reached out to the local SPJ chapter? Have you reached out to the region in which you are based? If the answer is no, we're going to come back to you and say, why? Why haven't you? Because we want to see those collaborations. So, but I will say, just to clarify, we expect and require that applicants must be affiliated with a nonprofit organization, 501c3. If you're an individual applying for a grant and you have no such affiliation, we will not consider your request. There are other grant possibilities within SPJ for individuals, but that is not what the grants committee can do. We can't do it. We are limited to providing money to 501c3 and related organizations.
Right. So another question that's come in is, will you consider funding student media?
Yes. In fact, we have done that in the past. However, I would again emphasize that if you're a student media organization, you should be working with your region, your SPJ region, and your SPJ chapter at your student organization, your university, if you have one. We've given grants in the past to initiatives involving student media, and we're absolutely open to that. But again, the best proposal is going to include collaboration with an SPJ chapter or region or both.
Right. So the next question is the grant for operational funds or project specific?
We do not fund overhead, and I mention this specifically in the context of universities, because I know from experience that universities always try to add operational overhead funds, and we are adamant that we do not fund that. Sometimes you have to get kind of creative, I suppose, to deal with that, but the bottom line is we're not here to provide funding for overhead kinds of expenses.
Right. Then this is somewhat related, perhaps. We have a question about a chapter interested in hiring a part-time treasurer. Would a grant help cover their pay?
I think that would constitute overhead expenses, so no.
So this is a good question. Does the committee have in mind a maximum amount to any one grant?
The answer to that is no. Other than that, I would say, again, no way are we going to divvy up our $75,000 and make like 2 grants. We like to be able to fund multiple programs. I can't speak for the committee, and we have no proposals before us yet, so who knows? But I think, again, if you look back at our history of what kind of grants we've given, especially in the last few years where we've had kind of an austerity program and haven't had a lot of money to give out, you'll see that giving grants beyond 4 figures is pretty unusual.
Right. So thank you thank you for that, Jane. We have a question on who is on the selection committee. I will try to type in an answer to that unless you want to name the members off the top of your head, Jane, on the committee. I think it might be better to.
If you can just type it in.
Okay, I'll do that.
But I can tell you, it's not a secret.
Okay.
It's Sue Porter, Matt Hall, and Andy, drawing a blank shots.
Right.
And myself.
And yourself. Thank you. So can applicants request review of the application before final submission? That's a technical question about the form, the submission form. I'm not quite sure about that.
If you have a question about the form, I think Jennifer Royer is the contact at headquarters for that. We really do not encourage applicants contacting either the committee itself or members of the boards. We're trying to maintain an arm's length process as we are looking at these applications. But if it's a technical question, if you think there's something not clear, we've been using this process for a long time, but if you're new to it and you have questions, Jennifer Royer would be at headquarters would be your contact.
So we have another question that talks about, is it only open to SPJ chapters? We've answered that. But specifically, they also asked, would a collaboration between a local press club and the local SPJ chapter work?
Absolutely. Again, hopefully the local press club is a 501c3 or something like that, but absolutely, again, and I would say, and it's encouraged because we'd like to see that kind of collaboration and outreach among organizations that are, aligned in terms of trying to promote journalism and press freedom interests. So that would be great.
Right. So another question is sort of putting forward a hypothetical kind of proposal. In general, would you consider a series of panels training the public on how to use the State Freedom of Information Act to access public records as fitting in the media literacy or defending the First Amendment?
Yes, and I think we have actually funded things like that in the past. I think it falls under the category of maintaining access to credible information and so forth, something that is limited not just to journalists, but to members of the general public. Again, there has to be a journalism connection. Historically, we funded educational projects writ large, but that is no longer a central part of the articulated mission of SPJ and the SPJ Foundation. But I think the short answer is yes, because presumably those kinds of trainings would also be open to and benefit people engaging in journalism as well as citizens.
Right. We have a question for if a new SPJ chapter applies for a grant, but doesn't have much to show for it so far, I guess, because it's small and it's a region that's typically underrepresented, would those factors be taken into account when giving out grants? So sort of, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's so hard to give specific responses to hypotheticals, but again, we look for, I would say, feasibility. So in other words, if you're a new chapter just starting out and you want to do something that you think aligns with our mission, the fact that you don't have much of a track record is not in any way a disqualification. But my concern would be that if you are taking on something that is really ambitious and there's no clear indication that it's something that you would actually carry out, we would wonder whether if we're allocating our limited funds to you, you could actually do what you say you're going to do. And that's not personal to any particular person or organization. It's just the reality that sometimes we do get grant requests that are extremely ambitious, and the amount of money that's being sought, it's just not reasonable to think that it would actually occur. But we want to make sure, and I want to say this loud and clear, as long as I've been on this committee, either as the chair or as a member, we have prioritized grant requests from chapters and regions. We have always done that. And that is in addition to the fact that we had this clear mandate to do outreach with other organizations. But now I think it's fair to say that it's even clearer that the regions and the chapters are people we want to put at the top of our list, all other things being equal. But again, if you submit a proposal that is not aligned with our mission, the fact that you're a chapter is not going to help. We're not going to give you money to do something that does not fall within our articulated mission, which was set not by the grants committee, but by the boards of SPJ and SPJ Foundation.
So this is a good question about whether if a project is not new, but it's aligned with the priorities, and they may be having trouble continuing funding for an ongoing project, would that be received well? Would it be possible to put in an application for that kind of continuation?
Of course you can apply for something like that, but I would say that it would be really important that you be clear in your application about what the track record of that project is. Here are the, I hate to use jargon, but here are the deliverables that we can point to. Here's what we accomplished. Here's what occurred as a result of this. Now we want to continue with this work, but we maybe have lost a funding source or something like that. And there's still a need, and we still have the capacity to do it, and we want the foundation to support it. That's a great thing to apply for support for, but it's kind of the reverse of the previous question about a new chapter that's trying something new. If you're talking about an existing project, we're going to want to see, okay, so how can you demonstrate to us that this worked before, and why you think it is, number one, needed, and why you think it will work again if we give you money. If you can make that case, that's a great proposal.
Right. So another question that's come in is whether the grant includes any language about being a restricted or unrestricted grant. Relatedly, they're asking about grant tracking or reporting requirements. So, it's sort of related to the general operating versus
right.
based.
I mean, those are very good questions. I mean, the first thing is we will be quite specific, and we will hold you to what you have told us you're going to do with your budget. If you come back to us in 5 months and say, well, we've decided we really don't want to do this project, we'd rather spend this money on something else, we will ask that you give us the money back, because we are going to fund a specific project as spelled out by you. You think of it as a contract. You're telling us, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it, here's how we're going to spend the money. And, the consideration is you're going to give us the money so we can do it. If you fail to do that, then we're going to ask for the money back. So I hope that is clear. We're not just going to give you $1,000 for general support for your chapter. It's got to be tied into some specific project that you've laid out and that you have given us a budget for, and that we are all on the same page that this is what you're going to do with it. There are reporting requirements. We ask for a report 6 months in after you get the grant, and then at the conclusion of the project. And I will add that when we get repeat requests in subsequent years, we do look at those reports. And if you didn't submit a report, or if your report was inadequate, that's going to be mean that we're going to take a very negative view about requests for future grants. So we're not trying to make it burdensome. These reports do not have to be lengthy, but we take seriously, as part of our stewardship of our money, making sure that we're monitoring how the money is spent and making sure that the project actually comes to fruition as we agreed to fund it.
Thank you, Jane. So this is more of a question about a certain time frame. Does the grant money need to be spent within a certain time frame? They give an example of applying for a grant this year, but not spending it until an event in 2027. Would that be appropriate?
I would say no, again, speaking hypothetically. We look at these grants as grants for the coming year. And so the expectation would be that, I mean, I can't say never, ever, but our expectation is that the grant funds would be expended within the coming year after you receive the grant. So, by the end of 2026, you would have expended the money.
Another chapter president has a question about whether funding partners need to be other journalism organizations, or can they be other nonprofits or even corporate funders?
We've actually never entertained the question about corporate funding. I would have to go back to the committee and see, but I don't think we actually have any prohibition on corporate partners. In terms of other funders, foundations, anybody like that is obviously fine. The issue for us really is that the grantee be a 501c3. And if you're doing the project in collaboration with, I don't know, I'll just make this up, your local newspaper or something like that, which is not, at least not voluntarily nonprofit, then that would be okay. That would be fine.
So we also have a question, another chapter president asking, how are we thinking about press freedom? Would offering journalists training on how to cover the police beat, for example, I'm assuming here, and what to do when you encounter obstacles to getting crucial information, would that be something of interest that would kind of fall under the priorities?
Yes, I mean that project that you have the questioners just described is sort of a classic example of the kind of thing that historically the foundation did fund, because we were one of our priorities was education and training for journalists. Again, if you go back and look at the grants we've given before, you would see there are many examples of training programs by national and local groups. So yes, certainly. I mean, I guess I would say it depends on what the training is in, but what this particular questioner has suggested would certainly fall within our priorities.
Right. So, okay, this is a question about nonprofit status. Many chapters are 501c6s. Are they also eligible? And if not, could a non-501c3 chapter request funds go to a 501c3 partner organization?
Right. I mean, I think part of the issue is, I mean, you've got to be nonprofit. And as you say, some of the chapters I know are 501c6s. We have given money to them in the past, but we will look closely at your project to see what you're doing. If you're using it for lobbying, we're probably not going to give it to you. But if you're doing something that a 501c3 could do just as easily as a 501c6, like an educational program like the hypothetical that we were just given, that would not be a problem. But you do need to have some kind of nonprofit status for us to give money to you.
Right. We have a question that I think I can answer. How many grants do you think we will give out? I will ask you to talk about that, Jane. But the second question, we are discussing $75,000. Is that the total amount available for all? The answer to that is yes, in the budget.
Yeah. That's all we've got. That's all the board has allocated, and it wasn't easy to get that much money. Some of you may be looking at the SPJ Foundation's money and think, oh, they've got hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why aren't they giving out more? Well, the answer is in part because SPJ Foundation has prioritized funding SPJ, national. And so a lot of the money that we used to give out to kind of general grants no longer comes to the grants committee. If you have, concerns about that, then I think you need to talk to the board. But years ago, the determination was made that providing support to SPJ nationally was a clear priority of the foundation, and how the SPJ board, as opposed to the SPJ Foundation board, chooses to allocate that money is something that you as a member should talk to them about. If you think they should be giving more money to chapter support, then talk to them about it. But the point is, regardless of the reasons, that's all the money we've got for this grant cycle. And although it's impossible to tell you how we'll allocate it because it's going to depend upon the grant requests we get, as I said, it's very unlikely that we would give like one or two very large grants and deplete all the money that way. There's been discussion on the board historically about the virtues of providing little seed grants as opposed to grants that will bring a project to fruition. And the board has never articulated a clear policy, but I can tell you that from the committee's viewpoint, we want to see that things are going to succeed. And we also don't want to kind of get lost in the crowd. So if this is a huge project, and it probably wouldn't be coming from a region or chapter, but a huge project that's going to cost millions of dollars, and we're just going to be a drop in the bucket of funding it, that's not something that we see as a good use of our limited funds. On the other hand, if you've got a great project that, let's say, making up a figure, is $10,000, and you just need another $2,000 to get over the top because you've already raised everything else, that would be something that the committee would I think, consider favorably. I'm not making any promises. Depends on the nature of the request. I'm just talking sort of generally how we try to make these grant allocations.
We have a question about, very specific question about, would a request from a chapter for help on putting on a regional conference be considered if the components align with at least one of our mission goals this cycle?
We certainly are open to the idea of proposals for programmatic activities, but again, it would be absolutely critical that it be aligned with the mission, and that it not be padded with other expenses associated with a regional conference or something like that. I'm thinking of some regional conferences I've attended where they have, a track dealing with, let's say, freedom of information or something like that. And if that was what you were proposing, seeking funding for, that it would be something the committee would be very open to. But if you want us to fund the cocktail party on Thursday night, that's not going to happen.
So this I think we've covered, but yeah, would you accept a joint submission between two related 501c3s?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure how many of those we've ever seen. I think we've seen one or two, but absolutely, we're open to that.
Right. Would you fund coverage of the developments in diversity in the media industry?
We've had long discussions over the years on the committee about whether we're going to fund reporting, for lack of a better term. And I think the general answer is no. There have been exceptions to that over the years, but ultimately, we don't see our role as underwriting news reporting. So I think the question would be, what's the context in which this request is being made? What's going to be the deliverable? Are you going to end up with culminating in, I don't know, again, I don't want to describe to you what your project would be, but so it's probably better for me to just limit it to this. We do not underwrite reporting projects.
Right. So another kind of related question, tangentially, is can we partner with a news outlet or newsroom, even though it's not a nonprofit?
I think most of our funding in partnerships historically has been with nonprofits like public broadcasting and things like that. I'm not sure we've ever actually had a request that was both. I would say it would have to be structured very carefully to make sure that we're not getting into the business of funding for-profit entities. I can't really answer the question in the abstract. I would kind of have to see it. I won't say absolutely no, because I don't like to think in terms of absolutes, but I think you'd have to make it very clear that there's a wall between the nonprofit and the for-profit entity to make sure that our money is going to the nonprofit.
So another question, in evaluating proposals from chapters and regions, will the committee take into account the current financial resources of the applicant?
The more information you can give us, the better. As I said, one of our key questions is, will you actually be able to do whatever it is that you're proposing? And that's going to depend upon the resources you have. As I said, it's not our practice to provide 100% funding for any project. We generally are looking for the requester to already have some skin in the game, either through their own resources or through additional fundraising. So I think the question would be, can you do this? Is this budget realistic? Will it be possible to get it done, assuming that we give you the amount you're seeking and based on your other resources? There's been debate on the board historically about whether we should be giving seed money to people, micro grants effectively. And there's never been any total, articulation of that policy one way or the other. There's obviously good and bad to either option. But I think the consensus of the board and the committee historically has been, as much as we want to kind of encourage you, we don't have enough money to be able to say, okay, we'll give you $1,000 and we hope you're able to make this work out, and we'll cross our fingers and operate on your good faith and say it's going to happen. We need to see that what you're proposing is realistic and that you realistically can carry it out. And if it's not feasible, then we're going to encourage you to go out, look for other funding, and think about a more realistic way to make your proposal happen in a future grant cycle.
So another question from a chapter president: does the project we submit have to be within a specific time period? We have an annual event every fall. Could we request a grant to help pay for that this year and next year?
Generally, we want you to have, well, again, remember, nobody's going to get money this year until November. So we're not going to fund a past event. And I'm not saying this is your situation, but let's imagine you have an event every June and you file a request and you say, we want funding for this year, June 25 and June 26. We're not going to fund for the past event. That is not going to happen. Generally, we want the event or the project to be completed within a calendar year from the time you receive your event, or in this case, or read your grant. In this case, it would be December of 2026. If you want to have it an ongoing kind of situation, you need to come back next year and ask for another grant.
We have a question on when the awards will be announced. And I think we said early November, right?
The decision will be made. The committee will make its proposal at the SPJ Foundation board meeting at Media Fest in October. The board will vote on that, assuming that they approve our proposal, which they do generally, but I suppose there's always a chance that they will not. But assuming that they do, then it will just be up to how quickly the headquarters can get the word out to the applicants and the money will be dispersed sometime in November of 2025.
Right. We have a question about someone asking if we have a successful application that could be shared to provide guidance for a new applicants. Yeah.
I'm going to just suggest again, if you've not already done so, go to the SPJ Foundation grant site and look at the grant awards we have made in the past, bearing in mind that our priorities have shifted somewhat, but just in terms of the types of grants and the amounts of money that were given. I am really reluctant to share previous grant requests because they are so idiosyncratic. There's a lot of variation in terms of what is requested, what we fund, and although we certainly want all the component parts of what we ask for in the application to be there, we're not looking for a full color printed spiral ring binder kind of thing. We don't want that. We want you simply to use the online application. So provided your application responds to all the things we're asking for, including your 501c3 status or 501c6 status, that'll be fine. We'll take it from there. The awards are made based on the merit, not the way you've articulated it in and of itself.
So this is a follow-up from a questioner who he wants greater clarity. He said, I should have been clear. Let me ask it this way. Will the committee ask for the current bank balance of a chapter? And if it seems able to do the project on its own, will that disqualify it?
Well, I don't think that we've ever asked for a bank balance. So the answer to that question is no. I think if I were writing a grant request, I would say, okay, so at this point, chapter X has in its bank balance, and I'm just making this money up, $20,000. And we have allocated, money for a variety of different things. And for this particular project, we would like to spend, I don't know, $10,000. And we would like SPJ Foundation to provide half of that or something like that. That's actually a good thing because it tells us that you've got, as I said before, skin in the game. You're prepared to kind of put your money where your mouth is and to finance some of it itself. If your question is, we're rolling in money and therefore will the SPJ grants people say, we want to give it to somebody who doesn't have any money or something like that. That really is not a discussion that we have ever had. We have looked at it sometimes for outside SPJ chapters or regions that are looking for us to help them fund something, and we'll say, look, you've got grants from the Ford Foundation. You've got all this money. You do not need the amount of money that we could provide to you. I don't know if that is answering your question, but again, we're not going to ask you for an accounting of how much money you have. And if you can say, we do have these resources, but we have other things that we want to be doing too. For this particular project, we'd like to have this amount of support from the foundation.
Yeah.
Supplemented by what we already have. That's great.
Yeah. And the questioner says he's grateful, and that is what he wanted to know. So thank you for that. A question about whether we could do another information session like this during Media Fest, during the membership portion of our conference. We're going to have an opening general membership meeting and a closing one. It's a good suggestion. I don't know if we're prepared to answer that right at the moment, but I appreciate the suggestion. I will say that there'll be, if there's further interest in it, we'd love to hear about that. So another question is whether a chapter may partner with a college.
Yes, absolutely. But with the caveat that one of the issues that sometimes arises when you partner with a college or university is that they will say, as part of our grant applications, you must include 5% for overhead or something like that. We will not fund that. So just be aware that that would have to be paid for someplace else other than with an SPJ grant. But with that caveat, yes, absolutely.
Right. This is a question about applying as a region. If we apply as a region, do I have to specify which chapters are involved?
The more information you can give us, the better. I realize that regions vary from place to place, but again, a region is, other than the annual regional meetings, again, and it varies from region to region. Many of them don't do much programming outside of their annual meeting. Oftentimes the real workhorses are the individual chapters. So again, our question is going to be, so who's going to do the work? Who's going to carry this out? So the more information you can give us in that respect, the better. Clarity, being concrete, who's going to do it, and here's the impact it's going to have throughout the region. That is really going to help us in terms of evaluating your grant request.
Well, I think we've reached the end of the questions that people have submitted. Oh, we got one more that just came in. So I'll just say, if you do have lingering questions, please put them in the Q&A box right now.
I did see the question that just popped up about college media.
Right.
I want to be very clear. We have provided money to support college media in the past. Sometimes what they're really looking for is underwriting for reporting, which is not what we do. I want to reemphasize that. The question is it going to be like a training or a seminar or something that is going to promote our mission? So if it's the Daily Bugle at Bugle College, it should not be a grant that's asking us to provide them with operational support, because we're not going to provide that. And I guess the other question is, because college media are many and varied, some of them are, the official student publication at a college, and others are independent. And regardless of what they are, they've got to be nonprofits.
Well, not seeing any more questions, I'll say thank you so much to Jane for all this information. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We're really inspired by your commitment to journalism and excited to read your proposals. As a reminder, the recording will be posted on SPJ's YouTube channel in the next few days. And if you have questions after today, I'm sure you will, feel free to contact us. Jennifer Royer is the point person at headquarters for this, and she put her email in the chat, or in the Q&A, and also it's available on the website. And we just really wish you good luck with your proposals. We're really glad that that you're interested, and the foundation is there to try to help. And we hope you'll keep doing the work that makes journalism stronger. So thank you all so much for joining us today.